Maybe this has already happened to you. You lay down, turned off the light, tried to rest, and for a second it felt like he was still there. Not the way it was before, not with the clear sound of paws on the floor, not with the visible body climbing onto the bed, but in another way, as if that side of the mattress still held a known weight, as if the room, for a few moments, stopped being just a room and became the place where the two of you ended the day together. And that's what this video is about that hard-to-explain feeling, about the dog that left, but somehow still seems to sleep with you, about small, everyday silent signs that many people feel, but almost never have the courage to tell, and mainly about what this presence can mean for those who still live with homesickness tightening their chest when the house gets too quiet. Because maybe you got here carrying a pain that no one sees. Maybe the bed got bigger after he was gone. Maybe there's a corner of the room that still feels occupied, even though it's empty. Maybe you're trying to understand if this is just memory, if it's grief, or if there's something about the bond between a human and their dog that doesn't really end when the body leaves. If this is your case, this video can help you look at this pain in a different way. Not to erase the longing, not to pretend that everything is fine, but to make sense of what you feel. To understand why certain presences continue in everyday life. To realize that the connection between you may be greater than it seems. And to leave here with a less confused heart, less alone, and maybe even with a little hope where before there was only silence. Because anyone who has ever shared a night with a dog knows that sleep was never just sleep. It was ritual. You could hear the paws approaching slowly. It was feeling like he was looking for his usual place. It was adjusting the body as if saying, without words, I am here. And when this habit disappears, it's not just the routine that changes. It's the soul of the house. It's the way to close your eyes. It's the emptiness of reaching out and finding only the cold sheet. But what if some absences are not complete absences? What if this video makes you understand why, even after saying goodbye, there are still nights when your heart swears he's back? Because before talking about spirituality, signs, or reunion, we need to talk about that memory that almost every guardian knows. The feeling of never having slept completely alone since the day he entered your life. And maybe that's exactly where it all starts. After a dog leaves, his absence doesn't just appear in big moments. It shows up in the little things, in the most common, the ones that seemed too simple to be important, until they disappeared. Maybe you still remember the sound of his paws running around the house, that noise that, for so long, was part of your routine without you realizing it. Day, night, early morning. Sometimes quickly, when he came to find you. Sometimes slowly, when I just wanted to check where you were. It was a sound so familiar that it became part of life. And when that sound disappears, the silence doesn't just seem like silence. It seems lacking. It looks like a void that moves through the rooms. And that's when a lot of people start to feel something strange. Because even when everything is quiet, the body continues to wait. The mind keeps listening. The heart continues to recognize. You enter the room, and for a second, it looks like he's going to appear at the door. You change position in bed and feel that automatic urge to leave space. You wake up in the middle of the night, and without thinking, you almost look for him with your hand. These things seem small to someone who has never experienced it. But for those who lived, they say it all. Because a dog doesn't just take up space. He occupies rhythm. He occupies habit. He occupies the natural sequence of his days. Maybe your dog followed you, even when you didn't even notice. From the kitchen to the living room. From the living room to the bedroom. From the room to the door. Not because I needed something all the time, but because his presence was a form of silent love. He just wanted to be where you were. I just wanted to stay close. And this creates a type of bond that goes far beyond visible affection. It becomes company engraved on the body. It becomes an emotional habit. Therefore, when loss happens, what hurts is not just remembering it. It's about continuing to live in the scenarios where he was. It's looking at the place where he slept and feeling that that corner still has something of you and him at the same time. Sometimes the walk is no longer there. Sometimes the blanket was kept. Sometimes the plate came off the floor. But there is one part of the house that remains different. As if the environment had learned to store the energy of that presence. And the nights tend to make all of this even stronger. Because during the day there is noise, tasks, movement, distraction. But when the house slows down, what was hidden appears. The room dark, the pillow, the sheet, the usual sleeping position. Everything starts to talk to the memory. And memory doesn't just come as thought. It comes as a sensation. As if the body remembers before the head. As if there was a part of the routine that still hasn't accepted goodbye. Pay attention to this. Sometimes grief doesn't speak loudly. Sometimes it manifests itself in the way you close the bedroom door, expecting a little being to enter right after. In the way you still avoid moving abruptly in bed, like you did to not wake him up. In the way the silence in the house seems greater just at the time when you used to rest together. That's why so many people secretly wonder if they're becoming too sensitive, or if there really is something beyond. Because there are nights when it doesn't seem like just a memory. It looks like company. It looks like a visit. It feels like a living echo of a love that refused to fade away. And it may be difficult to admit this to other people. Maybe you've already tried to rationalize, telling yourself that it's just custom, just nostalgia, just a reflection of what you've experienced together. And yes, nostalgia does that. Love creates deep marks. But some experiences don't just hurt. Some experiences are also comforting. As if, in the midst of the pain, something very delicate said that the bond had not yet been completely broken. A woman once said that after her dog left, the hardest part of the day wasn't the morning. It was time to sleep. Because it was exactly at that moment that she realized the size of the silence. But on some nights, when the room was dark, she felt the same peace as before. Not because the pain was gone. And yes, because, for a moment, it seemed that his presence still knew the way to her. And maybe you understand this more than you realize. Because there are bonds that don't disappear when the eyes stop seeing. They just begin to exist in a quieter way. And it is precisely in this silence that the next part of this story begins to make even more sense. It was like that with a woman named Helena. She didn't tell many people about it at first because she was afraid it would seem like an exaggeration. Her dog, a companion of many years, always slept on the left side of the bed. It didn't matter if it was hot, cold, if the day had been busy or heavy. When the house finally fell silent, he slowly went up, walked around twice as he always did, let out that light sigh of someone who had found the right place, and fell asleep. This happened for so long that it became more than a habit. It became a fixed scene in her life, one of those scenes so common that we think it will never end. But it's over. On their last day together, Helena was barely able to pay attention to anything. Anyone who has been through this knows that strange feeling. The clock ticks, people talk, things need to be resolved. But inside it feels like the whole world has lost its sound. She remembers the look in his eyes, a tired but gentle look, a look that asked for no explanation, just presence, just love. And after he left, the house was too tidy, too quiet, too empty. In the early days, she avoided going into her room early. I spent more time in the living room, invented tasks in the kitchen, touched things unnecessarily. Because she knew that when she opened the door and saw the bed, that automatic memory of the space where he used to sleep would come with it. It wasn't just longing, it was a small, repeated shock. As if every night brought the news of loss once again. And yet, her body continued to act as before. Before going to bed, he still looked to the left side. He was still arranging the sheet carefully. I still left a free space without realizing it. It was on one of those nights that the first thing she never forgot happened. The room was already dark. The street is almost noiseless. She lay there, tired, with that heavy sadness of someone who spent the day trying to appear strong. Then he felt a slight sink into the mattress. It wasn't something sudden. It wasn't a scary scene. It was exactly the kind of movement I knew well. Small, family, delicate, like when he went up calmly, so as not to disturb. Helena held her breath. It didn't move. The light didn't turn on. She stood there with her eyes full of tears, feeling her heart beat faster, because a part of her knew that this couldn't be happening. But another part recognized it at the same time. It wasn't his body, but it was his presence. The next morning, she tried to explain it to herself. He thought it was imagination, exhaustion, accumulated longing. He said that grief sometimes plays tricks. He said his mind was perhaps replaying an old memory. And he continued his life, or tried. But a few days later, it happened again. And then once more, always at night, always when the room was silent, always on that same side of the bed. Over time, she stopped feeling afraid that she was making things up. Because what was coming? Even that sensation was not confusion. It was peace. It was as if, for a few moments, the suffering receded just a little. As if the room stopped being the place of absence and became once again the place of encounter. Not a visible encounter, not a date the old-fashioned way, but still a date. One night she did something she had never done before. Instead of trying to understand, he just spoke quietly. "If it's you, you can stay." And cried. He cried like perhaps he hadn't been able to cry since the last day. Not because the pain increased, but because something inside her felt reached. As if the love that had been directionless after parting finally found a place to land. This story touches so many people because it doesn't seem distant. She looks ordinary. It seems like the kind of thing that could happen to anyone who has actually had a deep relationship with a dog. Because we're not just talking about beautiful memories. We are talking about repeated coexistence for years, of footsteps around the house, of divided nights, from a being who knew when to follow you, when to wait for you at the door, when to lie close without asking for anything. When a bond like this marks your entire routine, it's natural for it to continue leaving traces. And perhaps the strongest part of this story is not what Helena felt. Maybe that's what she understood later. She understood that longing does not always come just to hurt. Sometimes it comes carrying a sign. Sometimes, in the midst of grief, there is a kind of presence so subtle that only those who truly loved can perceive it. If something similar has happened to you, tell us in the comments. Because when one person has the courage to say, "I felt that way too," another person understands that they are not alone. And it is exactly at this point that the story stops being just about memory and begins to touch on an even deeper question. This is where a lot of people get stuck, because missing you is one thing, feeling presence is another. We can explain longing to others. You can say that you missed it, that you cried, that you remembered, that you had a dream. People understand. Maybe they don't understand the depth, but they understand the idea. Now, when someone says they felt the dog in the bed, that they noticed heat in the usual place, that they had the distinct impression of not being alone in the room, everything changes. The person himself begins to doubt himself. She thinks, "Am I confusing pain with desire?" And this doubt hurts in a different way because it's not just the loss of the dog. It's the insecurity of not knowing if what touched your heart was real or just an emotional need trying to survive. However, there are experiences that are repeated with such similar details that ignoring them is not simple either. People who feel the mattress give way exactly where they used to lie. People who, in the middle of the night, notice that automatic impulse to raise their arm to make room. People who wake up with the strange sensation of having been accompanied in their sleep, as happened before. And the most curious thing is that, almost always, this happens in the most common situations. Not in the middle of something great, not in a theatrical moment, but in everyday life, in the quiet house, in the dark room, at the end of a normal day, as if the presence appeared precisely where the bond was built, in the small repetitions of shared life. Maybe that's why the doubt is so strong, because everyday life doesn't seem like a scenario of imagination. It looks like a real scene. When you feel something in the same place, at the same time, with the same delicacy as before, your heart recognizes it, even if your mind tries to interrupt, even if part of you wants to protect yourself from the frustration. Even though rational thought says this could just be a reflection of grief. And yes, grief leaves echoes. It can make the body repeat old habits. It can make the ear look for sounds that are no longer there. It can make the hand reach for a hair, an ear, a warmth that has been recorded in physical memory. But what to do when, in addition to memory, there is consolation? What to do when the experience doesn't disorganize you, but calms you down? This is the point at which many people begin to realize that perhaps they are not just dealing with absence. Maybe I'm dealing with continuity, because there is a subtle difference between reliving a scene and feeling company. Reliving a scene is often stressful. Feeling company sometimes is hugging, and the pain doesn't go away. It doesn't disappear. The room remains the same room where the lack exists. The pillow remains the same. Silence remains difficult on many nights, but at certain moments, for a few seconds, something changes temperature inside the soul, as if the environment said, the separation happened, but the love didn't leave. Think about how many times your dog has made the ordinary special without doing anything extraordinary. He didn't need to talk. I didn't need to explain. It was enough to be there. All you had to do was lie down close by. All you had to do was lean your body against his foot, if guide you to the bathroom, wait at the bedroom door, occupy the usual side of the bed. This was how he participated in his life. This was how he showed belonging. And when a relationship was built this way, it's natural that his possible presence also comes like this. Discreet, every day, without fuss. Maybe that's why so many people don't tell, because it feels too intimate. It seems too delicate to be given to someone who hasn't experienced the same bond. But in the silence, the question continues to grow. If it was just memory, why did it feel so alive? It is a strong question, because it is not born of fantasy. It is born from experience. It is born from that night when you almost slept peacefully after heavy weeks. It was born from that moment when the emptiness of the mattress seemed smaller. It was born from the moment when the bedroom stopped being just a place of longing and became, for a brief second, a place of closeness. And perhaps the greatest tension is precisely here, accepting that two things can be true at the same time. You miss it, and you feel presence. You suffer the loss, and at the same time, you notice signs that don't completely match the end. This does not lessen the grief. It doesn't erase reality. It does not transform pain into a comfortable illusion. Just open it a crack. A possibility. The chance that some bonds, when they are truly deep, find new ways to remain. And before this seems like just a pretty idea, it's worth remembering one simple thing. The strongest bonds in life almost always continue to act on us long after they change form. With dogs, this can be even more intense, because they participated in our most disarmed routine. They were there when no one was looking, on ordinary days, on tired nights, in moments when there was no performance, just presence. Therefore, when something of them remains, it also remains that way. Close, low, almost invisible, but deeply recognizable. And it is exactly in this conflict between what the mind doubts and what the heart recognizes that the next truth begins to appear. It is at this point that the pain changes location. In the beginning, suffering is often focused on loss. In the news, on the last day, in the silence of the house after everything is over. But after a while, for many people, another type of conflict arises. A more intimate conflict, more difficult to explain, because it is not just about longing. He is trying to understand what continues. You look at the bed and know he's not there like he used to be. But some nights, some part of you feels like he still is. And that affects everything. Because the mind tries to organize the world logically. She wants a beginning, middle, and end. You want to accept that there was a body, a routine, a physical presence, and that this is over. But the heart doesn't work that way. The heart recognizes bonds, recognizes brands, recognizes presences that do not depend only on what the eyes can prove. Then a silent conversation begins within you. One part says, I need to accept it. The other whispers, but I still feel it. One part tries to follow. The other continues to leave space on the bed. One part wants to be rational so as not to suffer anymore. The other knows that there are nights when love seems to cross logic and play the same scene again as before. This is why so many people blame themselves without realizing it. He blames himself for continuing to talk to the dog that left. He blames himself for keeping the bed longer. You blame yourself for looking at the door, waiting for a movement that won't come the old way. He even blames himself for feeling comfort in experiences he can't explain, as if finding peace was a betrayal of reality. But it's not. Grief does not require coldness. Love does not need to fit entirely into other people's explanations. When a dog lives by your side for many years, he enters places in your life that almost no one enters. He knows your tired tone, know your silence, know your routine without embellishment, know the time you arrive. He knows when you are sad before you even say anything, knows how to lie close without asking for anything. This type of coexistence creates a bond so deep that it seems unnatural to imagine that all of this would simply disappear at once. And maybe it won't even go away. Perhaps the biggest difficulty is not accepting that he is gone. Perhaps the greatest difficulty is accepting that the form of presence has changed, but the bond has not. This is harder to process than it seems, because it breaks the idea of total goodbye. It forces the heart to live on a delicate border, where there is pain and comfort at the same time. Where absence is real, but does not seem absolute. Where the room was empty, but not completely empty. Where the end happened, but something didn't end. And that's when many people remember details that before seemed small. The way he always waited for you to lie down and then settle down. The habit of touching your body just enough to say, I'm here. Calm breathing near your sleep. The almost sacred certainty of, and that in some corner of the house he was. These memories don't just appear like old film. Sometimes they come back as a current sensation, as if the body still knew how to recognize that company, as if love had left an open path within the routine. And perhaps this is precisely what scares and consoles at the same time, realizing that certain connections do not obey physical disappearance in the way we imagined. There are people who resist this idea because they think that accepting this possibility is deluding themselves. But there is a difference between inventing something to escape pain and realizing something that brings truth into it. When a memory sinks you, you feel weight. When a presence visits you, sometimes you feel support. And anyone who has experienced this knows the difference in their own chest. No need for a show, no proof needed. It just needs that eerie stillness where the room feels familiar again. That early morning, when you didn't feel so alone. From that moment when the longing, instead of cutting off, just touched. Perhaps that is why the most difficult and most liberating sentence is this. Maybe he didn't leave. Maybe he just learned to stay in a way that you can't yet see. This idea hits home because it does not deny death. Don't pretend that nothing happened. It doesn't lessen the pain of the last goodbye. It just offers a greater possibility, that the bond between you and your dog was never just physical, that the bed you shared, the steps around the house, the corner where he slept, the way he followed you in silence, all of this built a bond that doesn't break the moment you leave. And when this possibility enters the heart, many things begin to change. Sadness does not disappear, but it is no longer just a rupture. Longing does not lose strength, but gains meaning. The night doesn't stop hurting, but it can be tender again. Because maybe you're not stuck in the past. Perhaps you are realizing the continuity of something that still touches your life now. If your heart has felt this, write in the comments, "I still feel it here." Sometimes this simple phrase helps another person understand that what they are experiencing is not madness or weakness. It's love trying to recognize the new form of an old bond. And when this new way begins to be accepted, the next part stops seeming impossible and starts to sound like a revelation. Perhaps the most important point in all of this is to understand that some bonds don't end when they stop being visible. They just change their language. During your life, your dog spoke to you in a very simple way, in the sound of paws around the house, in the way he expected you to arrive, in the way of following your steps without making noise, in the place where he chose to sleep, in the silent look that seemed to understand even what you never told anyone. This is how he said, "I am with you." After the match, perhaps this message will continue, but now in a different way, more subtle, quieter. More difficult to explain to those who have never experienced this type of bond. Because when we talk about spiritual presence, many people imagine something far from real life, something too mysterious, almost impossible to touch. But in the case of a dog, the experience is often the opposite. It appears precisely in everyday life, in bed, in the dark room, in the hallway of the house, in that sudden peace that arrives without warning, as if his presence still sought the same paths it had always known. And perhaps this happens because true love leaves continuity, not just memories, continuity. A dog does not love in the human way, full of calculation, reserve, or condition. He loves constantly, with repetition, with presence. It transforms everyday life into a bond. And when a being lives so deeply connected to its routine, its energy, its emotional state, it is not absurd to think that this link can remain beyond matter, not as a forced idea, but as a natural extension of what you built together. Think about it calmly. How many times has your dog noticed you before any words? How many times has he felt when you were bad? How many times did he approach you without you calling, as if he understood something that no one else understood? Many people have already experienced this. And these experiments show a simple truth. The connection between human and dog has never been just physical. There was always something more delicate, more intuitive, deeper. Perhaps, after death, this something more is precisely what remains. And this doesn't need to be treated as fantasy. It can be seen as a continuation of the soul bond. Because there are relationships that go through life as companionship. And there are relationships that go through life as encounters. The encounter between a human and their dog often seems to carry this second type of force. It's not just coexistence. It's not just affection. It's recognition. It's as if, amidst the chaos of the world, you had found each other to share protection, loyalty, care, silence, and love. And when a bond is built at this level, it may not fit entirely within a single visible existence. Maybe that's why certain presences continue to be felt. Not to bind you to pain, but to remember that love didn't end on the last day. Pay attention to this. Not every spiritual presence is enough to make an impact. Some arrive to calm down. Not every sign comes to impress. Some come just to comfort. And perhaps this is the most dog-like way to stay close. No scare, no fuss. Without demanding anything, just being, just doing what he's always done best, company. That's why so many people feel this closeness just at bedtime, because sleep has always been one of the most vulnerable and true moments of your life together. At the end of the day, when the noise of the world passed, he was there, without asking for an explanation, without wanting performance, just staying close, just taking his place in your peace. If there is a point in the routine where this presence can be perceived more strongly, it makes sense that it would be exactly there where the bond was repeated so many times. And perhaps the main revelation of this video is this: your dog may no longer be with you in the way that the eyes recognize, but that doesn't mean he's no longer with your heart. This idea changes everything, because the bed is no longer just a place of absence, and it also becomes the place of continuity. The silence in the house is no longer just empty, and it becomes a space where subtle signals can be felt. Longing is no longer just pain, and it starts to turn into a bridge. If you believe that the bond with your dog goes beyond this life, write in the comments, "His love still reaches me." This phrase may seem simple, but it carries a profound truth for anyone who has ever felt a presence that no one else has seen. And when this truth hits home, parting no longer seems like the absolute end. It just looks like a shape change. And it is exactly in this change that the heart finally begins to understand what the soul already suspected from the beginning. Maybe now that scene at the beginning makes more sense to you. The light off, the room in silence, the body trying to rest. And suddenly, that feeling that was almost impossible to explain, as if he were still there. At first, it seemed like just pain mixed with memory. It just felt like the heart trying to go back to a time that no longer exists. But after everything we've seen so far, maybe you can look at this moment differently. Maybe that presence in bed, that space that never seemed completely empty, that unexpected peace on certain nights, are not just remnants of the past. Perhaps these are signs of continuity. Because when a dog truly enters someone's life, he doesn't just occupy happy days. It occupies the entire daily life. The way to wake up, the way to the door, the sound of paws around the house, the place where he slept, the habit of looking down while you walked so you wouldn't trip over him coming up behind, the little things, the common things, the things that, in the end, were everything. And that's precisely why his departure hits so deep. It's not just because you lost an animal. It's because you lost a presence that participated in your life without effort, without pressure, without a mask. A presence that knew you in your tiredness, in your silence, in your sadness, in the simplest routine. He was there when no one saw him. On ordinary days, on long nights, in the moments when you didn't need to explain anything to be loved. This kind of bond doesn't seem small because it was never small, and maybe it was never a passenger either. Maybe what you experienced with him wasn't just company during a phase of life. Maybe it was a soul encounter, an encounter that left such profound marks that time cannot erase and death cannot end in the way that human logic expects. That's why some people feel the dog is still nearby. Not like uncontrolled imagination, not as an escape from reality, but like a silent continuation of a love that always knew how to find its way back. And perhaps that is what is most comforting, realizing that he no longer needs audible steps to be recognized. You no longer need to push the door with your nose, climb onto the mattress the old way, or lie visibly next to you. Now, he reaches you in another way, in a brief sensation, in a sudden peace, in a heat that appears without explanation, on a difficult night that suddenly seems less heavy. Maybe you still cry when you remember him. Maybe there is still a room in the house that hurts. Maybe it's still difficult to look at the place where he slept. And all of this is natural, because validation of grief is also part of love. There is no deep bond without deep longing. There is no important farewell without heavy silence high. The house changes, yes. The routine breaks, yes. The heart feels, yes. And no one should diminish that. Anyone who has ever lost a dog knows that the emptiness is not an exaggeration. It's real, it's daily, it's made up of details. But there is something very beautiful when pain begins to share space with new understanding. The understanding that physical absence did not cancel out emotional presence. The understanding that the love you built still resonates. the understanding that some bonds are still alive in a way that cannot be fully expressed in words. Maybe that's why so many people feel the dog more at night, because the night takes away excess from the world. In the darkness, what is essential remains. Too much memory. The bond remains. What remains is what the heart recognizes without needing to see. And sometimes there is also a kind of reunion, not a complete reunion, not yet, but a subtle touch of the same connection, as if he said, in the way he now can, "I still know where you sleep. I still know where to find you. I still know how to stay close." Think about the delicacy of that. During his life, he looked for his side of the bed. After the match, maybe you will continue looking for your heart. And perhaps the great transformation of this video is precisely this. You no longer have to choose between feeling longing and feeling gratitude, between crying because he's gone and opening yourself up to the possibility that he's still with you in some way. The two things can coexist. Pain proves the depth of love, and the subtle presence perhaps proves its continuity. If you've ever felt this way, write in the comments. He still sleeps with me. Not as a beautiful phrase, but as an intimate truth. Because when a person has the courage to say this, it allows others to also confess what they have held in for so long. And this type of comment doesn't just create engagement, creates belonging, creates community. It creates that silent relief of realizing, so I'm not the only one. And maybe no one needs to be. Maybe this space exists for just that. To bring together people who loved their dogs so deeply that parting couldn't convince the heart that it was all over. People who still listen to the silence of the house like someone listening to a living memory. People who look at their beds at night and instead of just seeing loss, begin to see mystery, tenderness, and continuity. In the end, perhaps the question was never whether he might still be around. Maybe the question is, can you recognize the new form of love he continues with? Because some beings pass through our lives, but others leave part of them where we slept, where we cried, where we lived. And some dogs leave their souls touching ours. So when night comes today and you turn off the light, maybe you'll pay attention more calmly, in the stillness of the room, in memory by the bed, in the feeling that sometimes appears without warning. Maybe the sheet will stay cold. Maybe the room will still be dark. Maybe the silence will continue there. But maybe deep down, you realize you're not as alone as you thought. And if this happens, don't try to explain too quickly. Just feel it. Because that space next to you, which once seemed too empty, may no longer just be the place of lack. It could be the place where love chose to continue.